Hi, everybody. So we're standing between you and lunch. We've got 20-something minutes or something to go after it. So my panelists were introduced, so thank you for that. So the topic is why brands are now focused on a consumer-centric omni-channel approach. So e-com growth over the last 3 years has been ridiculous, pandemic-induced. Now that things are starting to slow down, what are you doing differently as marketers to continue that growth, even if it's not at the rapid rate that we've seen over the past few years? And Michael, I'll start with you.
Yeah, in some regards, the dust is still settling, right? Consumer behavior is not a static metric. I mean, even professionally understanding work from home balance, work from the office, so many things are still kind of shaking out. But there's two things that I identify as extremely important coming off of COVID that as marketers, we have to address. And one that's especially important is accessibility, that our products have to be accessible. And we went a few years where all of a sudden people who may have been preferring the brick and mortar shopping experience lacked that accessibility and had to adjust their behaviors to going to online. And while many have returned to brick and mortar shopping, there's a large contingent that their shopping behaviors have changed permanently. So making sure that all products are accessible is absolutely key. The second, it'd be convenience, right? And I don't view convenience as an option, but really is a customer expectation at this point. So we view this not as a choice we have to make, but as something that we have to deliver. And then within that, making it as shoppable as possible so we can reduce whatever friction exists between whatever stage of the purchase journey that a customer may be at to conversion. If it's not accessible, if it's not convenient, then we're going to miss out on a large contingent of those people that we're trying to reach out to.
Yeah, that's great. Hailey, what do you think?
I would say that the shopper, well, we know industry has told us, accelerated their online habits 5 to 7 years in the course of COVID. So it's not that the shopper has necessarily changed, but they've evolved. And as we look at our business, we still do a significant amount, sometimes 90%, right, of the total in store. So we haven't lost touch with the store, but it's more about making it a seamless experience online to in-store. So if we're executing a campaign, you see the same face of the campaign, pivoting to retail media here, same face of the campaign in store that you see online. And if you're not in stock in store, how do you facilitate that purchase immediately online and you don't lose that point of conversion?
We'll get to retail media. Yeah. What do you think, Josh?
I think accessibility really are important to have the sort of like matching luggage, make sure you're consistent on messaging. I think for us, really the shift has been, we're going from this massive acceleration across all of our categories to now we have to be a little bit thoughtful about where growth might come from. I know that I have momentum in certain categories, but I'm not trying to force consumer behavior. I think you want to meet consumers where we are. So we're very focused on by channel, where are the categories at? Where do we see the growth rates? Where do we see the opportunities? And also, profitability is entering the conversation, right? We have to think about what's profitable, what's sustainable, what's viable long-term. So a big shift for us has been really looking at our portfolio, looking at the competitive set and trying to pick and choose opportunities rather than just try to, count on kind of everything going up at the same rate.
Yeah. And Stephanie, what are you seeing as best practices?
Yeah, it's a good question. Just for context, YML is a digital transformation agency. So we work with companies like Under Armour, Volvo, Champion, and Yeti, just to name a few, on how marketing, brand, and their digital experience can all come together. And something we've been talking a lot about is, in this post-COVID age, what's the new version of loyalty, which to us is no longer loyalty and points, but much more around membership. Your brand is really a collection of how someone feels when they're interacting with every single touch point, whether that's a piece of marketing collateral or they're shopping in store or they're on your website, going through a checkout process. And of course, each brand and company is different in that execution. So as you enter this new phase of post-COVID, and I totally agree, the habits have changed and it's been an acceleration, there's still a lot of things that hold true, but how can you have your brand feel and act differently, more like a customer is coming and acting as a member to your company in your interactions versus it just being a one-off interaction or having it feel more transactional?
Do you all feel the same way? Like, is that meaningful that the have to be really part of that brand and feel like a member?
Yeah, I mean, I have kind of a commercial background. I've been in e-commerce for a while, and I found in working with Amazon for a long time and brick and mortar customers like Lowe's and Home Depot, at its fundamental level, how basic just being available is. Like, it's so interesting, like how often we can think that we created the right campaign, we're driving the right kind of traffic to the right kind of place that ultimately yields in the worst possible outcome that any of us as shoppers end in, where the product is unavailable or it's not available for 2 or so weeks.
And even worse, that consumer then buys your competitor.
Exactly. And we can go from like this fantastic process right down to the right moment. And everything that we've told until then could be, completely crisp and perfect. And if it's not physically available, then we've kind of done a disservice, actually. Like we've now, instead of converted someone and opened the door to loyalty, we're opening the door to, the worst possible scenario, that is disappointment, and ultimately potential for different behavior. So I like to think of it as, how does that boil down to the shopper actually getting what we are creating? And oftentimes I realize the importance of just making sure that our product is fundamentally available.
So as a marketer, and I think that's an excellent point. I'd love the shout out for crisp in there. So I appreciate that. Even though it was, I don't know if that was intentional or not.
I'll say it was intentional.
That was quite good. The availability piece. So how are you as marketers working with your supply chain people? So you've got the greatest campaign in the world. You've reached the right people. To your point, they're now there, but the product isn't. So are you finding yourselves working more arm in arm with the distribution people, the supply chain people, et cetera? Or is it like, I'm really curious as to, those who have products in stores, how are you managing that?
I'll say where I sit, I don't work with supply chain directly, but I think on a media front, right, it's about flipping to the next SKU, right? Making sure you're not driving to a SKU that's out of stock and you're setting those alerts, right? In your pack view or your sky, how you're deploying your media to the SKU that's available, or making it an option for the shopper to, upsize or downsize.
I think for us, it's a lot of product prioritization. I talked about like the product focus, and we know that sometimes our best sellers online may differ from what's in store, whether it's larger sizes or more premium offerings. So we've partnered with a lot with supply chain about making sure there's visibility to sort of that, we call it sort of the power portfolio list for online. And we're also starting to get down to looking at actually at the store level, because so much of, omnichannel is buy online, pick up in store. Looking at it at a high level or just scraping one zip code is not enough. So we're also trying to partner with our retailers and identify outages. But I think it's a really challenging problem where you have those sort of regional outages where you kind of have to talk with your retailer about it. We're still trying to get there. But I think just getting granular on products and that sort of visibility of it is most of what we try to focus on, because you don't want to spend a lot of your time chasing some long tail item that's out of stock. You get an and-on cord on something that Amazon, but it's your 800th seller and it could take you like all, weeks to figure it out. So we do try to keep that prioritization in mind.
I think that's great. Any thoughts?
Yeah, it's interesting because I really look at it as a technology problem. There's so many different, systems you can use and integrations you can have to automate a lot of this, because I think there's usually so much burden, at least we see, on the marketer who's not necessarily connected to the product side of their organization, product being digital product, e-commerce. And, if there's no linkage to, your advertising, programmatic buys to, what's happening when it comes to your PIMs, your product information managers, there's ways for those systems to talk to one another that saves everyone, hundreds of hours of man hours. And it's usually us on our side saying, hey, if you just spend a few weeks kind of connecting these few things, it could, save a lot of headache down the road. Because what everyone's saying, I think, is completely right. It doesn't make sense, and it's such a poor customer experience, and then does create such a negative impact on your brand and loyalty. And I love what you said. It's like the opposite. It's dissatisfaction versus, creating that loyalty moment. And I guess it's the engineer in me. I'm just like, let's get these two systems and these two groups talking to one another, because we should, as marketers and brand advocates, be focusing on creating, magical moments and moments of surprise and delight versus like, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry that was out of stock. Like, will you give us another chance? Like, it's not the right problem to be solving.
Yeah, don't disappoint, right? It really is what it comes down to. Meet the expectation. Shifting to retail media networks, there are hundreds of them now. How do you as marketers decide where you want to spend your money, how to spend your money, and I think most importantly, how do you measure and track and then use that for reinvestment? Hailey, start with you.
Say we look at a couple different factors when we evaluate our partners. One is where we're partnering today currently from a trade and relationship standpoint, right? Where our brands, selling on shelf, right? And then we look at penetration, traffic, and we create this, I will say, somewhat of a ranking system, right, as to where we're going to really lean in and where we think we can get the most eyeballs on our product. And we approach it that way. It's, basically like it mirrors like the partnership we have, with our retailers in general. So it's not a surprise there.
Yeah, I think the big thing for us, and I would say like we're definitely evolving here, because I feel like early retail media days, it was like, the ROAS party. Oh, you go to your boss. Oh, I got an $8 ROAS, and everyone was fine and left you alone. And now it's, I think, shifting to new to brand, but then Instacart tells you you're 90% new to brand, and you're like, I think you're probably shifting channels there. So really, I think our mission right now is trying to figure out not lifetime value. I just refer to it as longer term value. So trying to get a purchase cycle or two down the road and understand that you're, driving that momentum beyond that initial purchase. Because I think ROAS is such an easy metric, but it's a very flawed metric. It doesn't have incrementality. And it's like, you've got to get to like, what is the real like longer term value of the right advertising
what's the
tools?
lift?
It is easily manipulated too.
Yeah.
Like I would tell everyone to be very leery of measuring a campaign on ROAS, because all you do is bid on branded terms and you're going to show a really good ROAS.
Is it what's it saying? It's lies, damn lies, and statistics. Like it's sort of the same thing. You make the numbers look however you want them to look. So
Like, I think the word that I try to stress internally is to be judicious, right? Like we can't do 200 retail media networks. We can't answer every call that we receive and do everything that we can do. So we have to be really, really judicious. And sometimes it feels like with retail media that this is a fast moving train that you get on or it's going to fly past you. And I don't think it's like that. There's too much being figured out. I mean, it's funny, we talk about ROAS, how it's already kind of a dying metric. And didn't Amazon only release that like in 2020 or 2019? I mean, already these are metrics that are being outdated a couple years in. And so in my global role, I get to work with our US teams, but LATAM, EMEA, and what I enjoy is really making sure that there's a fundamental understanding and education of what retail media is and have that standardized and accepted across the organization, because unless you do that, everyone's gonna have their own opinion, probably based on LinkedIn posts that they're gonna find. And that's absolutely critical. And then to base ultimately the framework on what you want to achieve out of that. And Hailey says something really important, that is just basically looking at what the retailers have to offer, because it's not gonna be the same. So you have to look at the trade dollars and where the current spends are going. And before you place any dollars into retail media, I'd like to tell our teams, just hold on. I know that patience is not the best word that's used in retail media, but I do believe there's a large degree of patience and focus on the fundamentals of what it is and what it can do before we start a spending spree, especially in an environment when budgets are tighter.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. How do you make sure that you're not in conflict? And Hailey and I were talking about this earlier, and Stephanie, direct this to you, is you're spending money on retail. I assume your clients are spending money on retail media.
Some of them, yes.
Some of them, yes. And you also have branded campaigns, national campaigns. How do you think they're cannibalizing each other? Are you spending too much in certain areas because you're not able to look at the full view?
Most of our clients are really, I think, looking at the end-to-end digital experience and trying to map, at least when we're talking to them, match their spend alongside with that. For example, we have some clients in the CPG space, and they're not really, selling DTC, online direct through their .coms, but, driving to Walmart, driving to Amazon is going to be hugely beneficial for them. However, they're trying to work on innovative initiatives so they can bring people back for some brand loyalty. So the long and short of it is, at least for us, we're seeing it be really individualized, and we're not getting into the nitty gritty around different channel spend. So these experts here might be able to give some better advice, but we're just trying to say, really try to show up where your customers are. And again, don't just rush on something because you're seeing it be pushed or because Amazon is saying you need to, get on this train or it's going to leave without you. Because if there's one thing I think we know from the past few years is change is inevitable, and your customers, might shift their behaviors pretty quickly over time too.
I think that's spot on. It was your question. You and I talked about this in the prep call.
I'd love to weigh in. I'd call it the elephant in the room. So you think of national media awareness consideration, right? That's where they play in the funnel. And with retail media, which I'm biased, but I love the fact we're closest to the point of conversion, right? And that's where we need to be focused in the funnel. So we are very deliberate in the design of our campaigns of staying in that lower area of the funnel, whether it's conversion or it's ultimately loyalty. And that's how we avoid competing against our national brand counterparts. We also have the benefit, as you get more sophisticated tools, we have MMM studies where we're looking at the results of our retail media campaign alongside our national digital display, TV, whatever print we might still be doing. It's still a little bit in there. But we get to see them all benchmarked against each other and know. And even now, we're seeing Amazon providing omnichannel halo data, right? So I'm really excited about what the next even year is going to bring as we start to see more of an impact nationally from retail media efforts.
Yeah, I think Stephanie said change is inevitable, and it certainly is. Josh, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I look at it, I mean, there's definitely a conflict there, but I also think there's an accretive piece there. And like, I think the examples I would use is Amazon streaming TV, right? You get a purchase-based read. I think we have to be very careful, right? Because as you move up the funnel, if people are looking at ROAS, they start to freak out. So you have to get people to think of it a little bit differently. But, first-party purchase-based data is hard to come by, right? And so I think thinking about how can we use retail media networks in kind of the right way, kind of up the funnel to sort of augment campaigns. Another example I would use is sort of Pinterest. A lot of our omni retailers will sell Pinterest campaigns, and it's a different way in, but maybe it fits into your holistic Pinterest strategy. So I've been trying to sort of encourage how we can think of it as part of the national strategy. But to your point, I want to make sure that brands look at it in the right way and are regarding in the right way and don't think, oh, this is Amazon dollars, this is Target dollars, like this isn't part of my media campaign. And being careful of, like, I think every CMO's sort of nightmare is that one day all of their media will be retail media, right? And they'll lose their equity building money. So I think we have to be choiceful there, but I do think there is a role to play with a little bit mid or upper funnel for retail media.
Yeah, and there may be conflict in the short term, but this should be opportunity in the long term, right? I mean, should be bringing our national media, shopper marketing teams, performance marketing teams, however your org is structured. But there's some growing pains as part of this, but the outcome should yield a better overall relationship with the retailer, which is the end goal. So I think that there's conflict, but then there's also that opportunity. There's light at the end of the tunnel that coming out of this. Internal org structures aren't solved or built overnight. But the end goal, I think, will lead to overall better partnerships.
Believe it or not, we're starting to come up on time, and I want to leave some time for questions. What haven't we talked about that's top of mind?
I just think it's really interesting when we talk about, omnichannel, customer-centric, marketing, again, really dialing into that customer experience. One of, our favorite case studies is the work we did with Polestar, which is Volvo's electric vehicle, the partnership they've had with them. And it was such an interesting problem to solve about how to get more awareness around them to, they don't necessarily like being considered a challenger to Tesla, even though they are in the EV market, and to talk about that and have that brand messaging come through, but also how to bring people into the purchase funnel who are driving different places. So for context, driving an electric vehicle is much different here in Las Vegas than it would be in New York City versus it would be out in the West or in Europe. So how can you have not only contextualized marketing, but have that experience follow through people to the site and use smart data to say, hey, we know you've been to a dealership a few times, you've actually been shopping, get you connected with the right people and really make sure that you're getting someone from all the way to awareness through consideration to really getting them in the hands of a dealer and then, actually converting and placing that deposit down. So I think for me, something that, I feel really passionate about is, again, how do you build something like that from the ground up? I find a lot of these are tech problems or opportunities and getting the right people in a room to get talking to one another. And yeah, it's something that we've been seeing come up over and over again. And it's just been really exciting, kind of like, how do you build that from the ground up and just be relentlessly focused on the customer's experience.
That's super cool. It never occurred to me to think, there are different driving experiences and I can market to these people differently based upon that. That's very interesting.
I'm going to go in a different direction as far as what we haven't talked about yet that's happening now, is this interconnectivity of all the tools we're using. Right? I've had conversations with PackView. Well, you have Luminate data. How do we get Luminate connected to PackView? Oh, and there's Profitero, right? Our digital shelf analytics tool. How do we get that connected to PackView and to, I don't know if Lumen, it's all starting to like weave together. We've got an API for that. We need an API for that. And how we manage that new world of all this interconnectivity is something it's kind of daunting. Like, okay, this is great. Now, how do we make all this work, right? How do we use inventory data from Luminate at the store level to connect to the Profitero digital shelf data to the ultimately our media execution? I think the first folks that do this well are gonna win some share.
Yeah, I mean, you're essentially becoming technologists.
As I say, right next to my competitor Kenvue.
You can both call YML. We'll build you a data lake.
Yeah, and I think it's not only the tech challenge of just getting everything together. Like, I don't know. I think there's a lot of infatuation with dashboards, and I like kind of loathe dashboards because I think it's also like it's great to have like a nice top line with pretty pictures, right? But you need a feedback loop. To your point, you need to get data together, and you need to be able to drive actions. And I think that's sometimes where things break down is you get this data together, but if you can't immediately get to the diagnostic layer of it and the action layer of it. And to me, that developing that process, that muscle is like a big thing that we're trying to figure out over the next couple of years.
And automate it.
Right.
Computers can move a lot faster than people.
True.
One thing I'm looking forward to, and maybe this is a function of my Eugene, Oregon hippie roots, which is where I'm from, is how sustainability is going to creep into the advertising space. Because there was a great ShopTalk presentation about this yesterday, but I mean, this is front and center for a lot of consumers' minds. It's being reflected in packaging. It's being reflected in Climate Pledge Friendly badge on Amazon, and how retail media networks and brands, by having improved targeting, which based off the first party data should be one of the promises, how that then weaves into and now can calculate the improvements we're making on ad impression savings and what this ultimately leads to in CO2 emissions. That's a frontier that I think will be really interesting to unpack.
Well, yeah, and one of the founders of programmatic advertising, Brian O'Kelly, is Scope 3, and that's exactly what he's trying to do. But I think the flip side of that, or the tangent to that, would be how do I make sure that I'm only serving impressions where I have product available? Yeah. Why would I waste that? Even becoming that sort of efficiency makes all the sense in the world. So, 3 minutes to lunch. Open it up to questions, if there are any. It's a quiet group. Yeah.
Clean rooms, you guys can discuss that at all, right? You use the first party data that you, as brands, right, get to mix and match with retailers. All hype, all value. What's your perspective?
All testing is kind of my perspective right now. And globally, for example, from an Amazon perspective, it's not available in the same level of maturities in all markets. So for me, it goes back to like, what is the main benefit and objective of a clean room? And why do we have it? And what problems can it solve that we couldn't solve otherwise? And that influences how we build our global roadmap, is addressing the most challenging questions that we're facing, and then see if clean room technology serves to answer those, but not have it be, hey, cool, there's a new tool. Let's go ahead and throw a lot of hours into it. So for us, it's very much in a let's prove it out and let's test it.
I would echo the testing mindset. I mean, I think to really do it well, the challenge I think in CPG is D2C, trying to justify that to sort of like a CFO, right? It can only get so big for a lot of your products, and it adds a lot of complexity, a lot of people. And I think that conversation kind of goes in concert with first party data and clean rooms and things like that. So it's a big lift. And I think, our mission or our sort of challenge is to prove the value out. How do you do sort of an initial use case and kind of scale it from there? And it's challenging. Like you need the right tech partners, getting tech partners in CPG and the right tech partners. Like it's not always easy. So
I would tell you it's a project being led globally, similar to what Michael shared with Kenvue, similar with Sanofi. And we've got some different case studies we've explored. We're honing in on a couple of them to test and learn, see what we can garner from it. And the story's yet to be told.
You're building data lakes. What do you think about clean rooms?
Yeah, just add it in. Now, I don't have much to say. I don't actually have too much experience with it. But for us, it really is bringing all those datas and again, creating some sort of middleware layer. I just really agree with what you said. And like everything is requiring an API at this point. And for us, we've worked with companies like C3, which is a major AI implementator, and bringing, all of their data in. And yeah, a lot of it is just figuring out like the right ways to take that data, where to start to have some segmentation, where to, I'm using what everyone else said here, but, drive some tests and see how it can improve the customer experience. So for us, it's just, anytime we get access to a new data point, we're like, all right, great. Like add it into
exploit it.
Yeah. Like, let's see how we can use that. And I think again, for us, it's really figuring out all of the different parts of where customers are experiencing your brand, whether it's and your company, whether it's on that initial brand awareness side, all the way down to conversion, and just making sure you're taking that all in and serving up in the right places in the right moments.
Fantastic. We'll leave it at that, but it's not the last we're going to hear from you. I hear you're emceeing at lunch.
Yeah, exciting, right?
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah.